Hey everyone, Sam Bowers, consultant for continuing education at the State Library of Iowa here. As promised, here's our first kind of homework assignment video. As I'm recording this, we're just a couple days out from the learning circuit, but I hope you're watching this. If you're watching this months or years from when we did the learning circuits back in October of 2022, hello to you as well. The aim of these videos, we're going to put out one every week, is to sort of assign you homework to work through as you think about putting together a disaster preparedness plan for your library. So up on the screen here now, you should see the Disaster Preparedness Toolkit available to you from the State Library of Iowa. All kinds of resources here related to disaster planning and your library. You will see some information from the 2022 Learning Circuit, the slides that some of our presenters used, some additional resources related to planning and support. But in particular, I do want to highlight our Disaster Response Plan Template. So you'll click here to download. It's going to download as a PDF and open in Microsoft Word. So from here, you can just edit away. This first video is going to just talk through kind of this table of contents page a little bit and putting together your team, as well as some of those additional phone calls. So each video that we release every week will have some additional information. If you complete the homework assignment assigned to you at the end of that video in about a month, you will have a disaster plan all of your own. So to point out here in Microsoft Word, if you haven't used the table of contents feature before, it's pretty handy. You'll work your way through this whole plan, and once you're all the way done, or as you want to see these page numbers update, it's just kind of a little trick. You come in here and you push Update Table, choose that you want to update the whole table, and then you'll see any new sections that you've added here, as well as you'll see the page numbers update. So that's just kind of handy as you're working your way through this. Scrolling on down past the table of contents and the appendices, like I said, we'll work our way through this whole document as we go. It is not super long. I think you'll find it will scale really well for big, small, and medium libraries. Of course, the first thing to note, and I hope this goes without saying, but we always want you and your staff and your patrons to be safe. So as we're talking through all of these things with regards to saving your collections and documenting damage and maintaining your facility, it goes without question that you and your staff and your patrons need to be safe before you take any of these actions. So always start with that. I just want to make sure that that's out there. Get help as you need it. And again, making sure that lives are safe, and then as that permits, any physical property that you might want to maintain in your library, including your books or other resources as well. Again, to state the obvious fact, I hope, if there's a fire or anyone is injured, you call 911 first. And it is important that you call 911 and not a local person, because that 911 dispatcher is going to connect you to whoever is close and available and able to help. So even if you have a contact with the local police or EMT, start with 911 and they'll get you hooked up with the right person to help. You always want to include this basic information in your plan, although you might be able to rattle it off the top of your head. You never know who is going to be first on the scene to respond to a disaster in your library, if it's a new staffer or a volunteer, or even someone with more experience. In the face of a real emergency, it's really easy to freeze up. So just clearly spelling out this information and having it right at the front of your plan is going to be helpful in the event of an emergency. Looking at this list of additional phone calls, you're probably thinking, well, why wouldn't I just put the director's name or the department head's name in this whole long list for everyone to call? And it's true, you do want to make sure that your director is informed of any issues going on with regards to an emergency. But suppose the director is unavailable for whatever reason. Maybe they're out of town, maybe they're at another meeting and not reachable, or maybe they've been impacted by whatever disaster is impacting your library as well in their home or personal life. And so you just want to make sure that whoever picks up this plan knows, okay, who's the name of an electrician to call that we have on retainer? Who do we call if there's building damage? Is it the city clerk? Is it some sort of facilities team? What's our IT department if there's been a hack of some sort or any sort of computer damage? So Certainly the director is going to want to be on this list as well, but do keep in mind the director might not always be available. Working our way through the response team, it's also worth noting here that especially in the small library, although I think in large libraries as well, you will see one person's name in multiple blanks on this list. So don't worry about that. We expect that to happen. But if you are a small library or a solo shop, I would also encourage you to be thinking about who can be a backup to you if you're not available. Again, for whatever reason, if it's a good reason or maybe it's a stressful reason for you, you want to make sure that the library stays as operational as possible. So when we think about the team leader, this could very well be the director, or in a large library, maybe the assistant director, but you want this person to be well equipped to be managing this team of people, kind of keeping all the moving pieces that go into recovery moving forward. And again, designating a primary person to do that job and a backup person to do that job. Your communications coordinator is someone who needs to have access to all avenues of your library's communications network. So think of your catalog, your emails, your newsletters, your voicemail messages. You're going to want to use any form of communication possible available to you to be getting the word out about how the library's been impacted by a disaster. You know that people are going to be calling to see if you're open. They're going to be calling to see if they should bring their books back. And you want to have that word out there as clearly as possible. And again, on social media, on your voicemail, on your website, as many places as you can. So it's the communication coordinator's role to make sure that staff and the public are being communicated with about what to do and when. Your administration and supplies person is going to be keeping track of all of the disaster response supplies you have available to you in your library. We do encourage you to have a separate kit with some basics in it, but of course that kit itself could be inaccessible due to a disaster. That kit could be incomplete because you're a small library and you don't have room to store a ton of stuff. So the supplies person is going to need to have a ready list of where to grab supplies that might be available to them in the event of a disaster. And they also need to have clearance to purchase additional supplies or make additional purchases as needed throughout the course of a disaster. So from my perspective, this could be a good role for someone on your library board who would have purchasing power. Fill this blank on the template for you. Your collection care person is going to be the one thinking about the safety and priorities of the collection. So in a large library, you might want someone from every department represented on this team to begin to prioritize the items in their departmental collections. But overall, you want someone who has some basic knowledge of what to do with wet, damaged, moldy materials. And that's a skill that can be learned. And of course, there are resources available to help you with that as well. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the salvage part of the plan in the next couple weeks. Your documentation coordinator should be working to take photos of the disaster during and the recovery stages, as well as it's safe for them to do so. And you also want this documentation coordinator to be available to be kind of keeping track of the decisions that were made. So if a large-scale disaster hits the library and we unilaterally decide, okay, we're not going to salvage this collection, we're just going to work on replacing it. That's an important decision that you want documented, and so your documentation coordinator should be keeping track of kind of all those major decisions that were made. Facilities and safety is going to be kind of thinking through if we receive notice of a tornado, do we know how to keep our patrons and our staff safe? Do we know where the shelters are? Do we know what their capacities are? Are we able to get people in there safely? What's the procedure for minors? What's the procedure for adults if they choose to leave? So just knowing how you're going to keep people and buildings as safe as possible. So that's a really high-level overview. There are a few more kind of notes on the team in the slides that the State Library put out as part of the 2022 Learning Circuit. So you can check those out as well. So that's your homework for this week, to kind of review that immediate call and response list as well as begin to put together that team. We'll check in next week. We're going to be working through the next sections of the plan, which are related to your service contacts and some of the other support numbers that you'll want to have handy after a disaster occurs at your library. So we'll see you next week. Be working on your homework, and thanks for tuning in.